walking alongside Europe's deadliest land border, but I'm not in Europe, I'm in Africa. Walking around here, you definitely feel like you're in Europe. And when you talk to the locals, they confirm that feeling too.
Está en África, pero esto es aquí, es una zona europea. Porque la ciudad, Melilla, es de España.
Even the public benches are red and yellow, the items in the park are red and yellow, and the Spain flag is literally everywhere you look. So there's one glaringly obvious contradiction to all of this, and that is that we're in Africa. If you go far enough in that direction, you'll hit the Sahara Desert, and you won't need to cross any water to do so. There's been a police presence pretty much everywhere I've gone, which makes sense because they are extremely skeptical of journalists and anybody that might be reporting on what's going on here at the borders and the way that they're conducting themselves.
What followed was the deadliest attempt to cross a land border into Europe in recent memory.
It's quite surreal to know what happened and be stood next to it. I have to be careful filming around here.
Tengo que identificarte. Tienes que tener identificación tuya en la calle.
So why is this little pocket of Europe here? Why do the two countries either side of its borders dispute its validity? And most importantly, why does it continue to cost the lives of those it attempts to keep out? Look on a map of Morocco and you might see nothing out of the ordinary. But look closer and you'll see two little enclaves of Europe, right there on the African continent. Ceuta and Melilla are two cities entirely surrounded by Morocco that technically are part of Spain. So I've headed to Melilla to see how this dynamic feels in person. I'm paying in euros, I'm speaking Spanish, and I've just had pan con tomate for breakfast. So right now, I'm feeling pretty European. It's kind of surreal to think that you can be here enjoying a typical Spanish beach as you would anywhere else in Spain, but then right there in the distance is Morocco, is Africa. You can definitely recognise more of the Moroccan influence the further out of the city that you go. I think I might be just getting the first glimpses of the border, just through the trees looking. Right there, just beyond that fence, is Africa. So the obvious question is, how on earth did these territories become a part of Spain?
Once it's set up, no, because it's good.
Hello.
How are we? Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
That's David Stenner, a scholar and professor specialising in North Africa and editor of the Journal of North African Studies. David's helping me understand the diplomatic history between Spain and Morocco.
So in 711, Muslim troops set over the Strait of Gibraltar from what today is Morocco, and they very quickly conquer most of what today would be Spain and Portugal. But there still remained some Christian kingdoms in the north and the northeast. And then starting in the 11th century, they begin the reconquest of the territories that used to be Christian. They move slowly southward, and then by 1492 managed to secure the surrender of the last Muslim territory, the city of Granada. And in that moment, all Muslims are allowed to remain, but must convert to Catholicism and establish a territory and a kingdom that today we would recognize as Spain. At the same time, it also begins its project of expanding in the New World. And the third factor is the Mediterranean one. There, the most important empire is the Ottoman Empire. And Spain begins to engage militarily with the Ottomans, views itself as the European vanguard on behalf of Christendom fighting back against the Muslims.
Okay, so by now we understand that there's a long history of confrontation between these two regions. Spain was unified into a single kingdom after pushing back nearly 800 years of Muslim rule. And in the centuries that followed, it came to see itself as the defender of Catholic Europe against the growing influence of Muslim powers. So I wanted to know if the capture of Ceuta and Melilla was at all tied to retribution, or revenge, in simple terms.
I think it is part of the equation. The larger, more geostrategic reason was, if you have these two strongholds, it's basically two small military fortresses at that time. Having maybe about 1,000 soldiers, they also become penal colonies. So there's a small military base, well secured, there's a harbor, and there's a prison. And that's basically it. There's no major economic activity. These places are quite expensive for the Spanish crown. And I think the goal is to ensure that there isn't a reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula by North Africans, sort of more, we play offense in order to not have to play defense. There was never really any plan to expand from there and to take over North Africa and turn it into a Spanish colony during this period.
So by this point, we're at the start of the 17th century, and Spain has managed to acquire two strategically important assets from the North African coast, right?
Yes, and then we see the beginning of the scramble for Africa.
Now, if you don't know, the scramble for Africa was a period in the late 1800s when European countries rushed to take control of land in Africa. They wanted power, resources, and trade routes. It was basically a race to claim as much territory as possible before their rivals did. During this period, the Kingdom of Morocco was politically and economically weakened and fragmented, and European powers were becoming increasingly interested in the region. So, to avoid being fully colonised, reluctantly, in 1906, Moroccan delegates allowed Spain and France to divide their territory into two spheres of influence. France was granted control over the central, most populous and politically significant parts of Morocco, while Spain took control of certain areas in the north and south. Spain's control in this region was not colonial in a traditional sense, but instead labelled a protectorate, meaning the local Moroccan rulers still optically held power, but Spain effectively controlled the political and economic landscape. Throughout the century, Morocco began to develop its own nationalist movement, which was focused on independence from both France and Spain. And as with many colonial states, this movement gained significant momentum after the culmination of World War II as decolonisation trends spread across the world. The colonial powers by this point had to recognise that Morocco's independence was inevitable, and in 1956, a treaty was signed that officially ended colonial rule. Spain relinquished its protectorate in northern Morocco, but most importantly, kept control of its enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla.
And so, here we are in the 21st century. Today, Ceuta and Melilla remain under Spanish control, and Morocco has never really accepted this. But now there's a new problem, and it's a problem with blood on its hands. Behind me lies the border that, much like in Ceuta, has become a flashpoint for attempted mass crossings, some of them proving deadly. Migrants have tended to camp on the other side of these walls, waiting for their numbers to grow big enough before organising coordinated rushes on the border in a bid to overwhelm the guards standing between them and their hopes of getting into Europe. But what gets really interesting is what we find when we take a look at how Morocco responds to these large-scale border infiltration attempts. Okay, let's go back to 2015 when tragically 15 migrants drowned despite only 200 of them attempting to get into Ceuta.
Spain faced criticism from the EU over the incident.
These pictures show Spanish border guards firing rubber bullets and smoke canisters towards survivors as they swim across the border.
In response, Spain accused their neighbour of failing to take sufficient precautions to curb the flow of illegal migration, which in fairness to Morocco, sparked a period of much improved migration management on their side. For 5 years, much to the delight of Spain and the EU, Morocco tightened its border security and crossings became more controlled. And even in times of high tension, like in 2018, when 22 Spanish officers were injured during a rush on the border, coordinated measures between the two nations helped to limit any serious confrontations with migrants and prevented any casualties. But then came 2021, where everything changed.
Ceuta has long been a focus for migrants and asylum seekers from Africa trying to make it to Europe. But the number getting in this week is unprecedented.
After Spain hosted the Polisario Front's leader for medical treatment.
Okay, I was just editing this and I realised that it's important to clarify who the Polisario Front are and why Spain allowing their leader in for medical treatment mattered to Morocco. The Polisario Front are a nationalist movement fighting for the independence of Western Sahara, a disputed territory that Morocco claims as its own. For decades, the Polisario has been pushing for a referendum on independence and is backed by Algeria, which is Morocco's regional rival. So, when Spain allowed their leader in for medical treatment on Spanish soil, Morocco saw that as a direct show of support for a group that they consider a threat to their sovereignty. Okay, back to the doc to see how Morocco responded to this.
Over 2 days, Morocco allowed more than 8,000 migrants to cross into Ceuta unresisted. This wasn't a lapse in control, it was a calculated move. Footage of Moroccan guards opening gates and encouraging migrants to illegally cross into Spain quickly emerged online.
So by this point, the message was clear. Migration into Ceuta and Melilla had become a diplomatic weapon, and one that, despite condemnation by the European Parliament, they were willing to use.
Let's remember, the border with Ceuta is not only the border between Morocco and Spain, but it's also a European border. The lack of control by the Moroccan authorities isn't only a lack of respect towards Spain, but towards the European Union as a whole.
And well, the thing is, it worked. Spain aligned with Rabat's proposal for regional autonomy in Western Sahara, and for the first time, acknowledged the region as part of Moroccan sovereignty. And well, it would seem that set the stage for what was to come. Now behind me, beyond the border fence, is the mountain where it's reported that once Spain had aligned with Morocco's proposals, there was widespread harassment of the migrants that had gathered there. It stated that they chased and arrested the migrants, destroyed their camps, and even burnt their stuff. Local traders were discouraged from selling goods to the migrants, and water sources like the streams that run around the area were intentionally cut off. As the months went by, the grip around the migrants' movements got tighter, and the clashes became more frequent, before one day it hit breaking point. The majority of the following information is taken directly from this extensive report. It's a report written by Amnesty International which details the day and the events running up to the day, and it's probably the best resource I've found in terms of understanding what transpired. So if anybody wants to read it in full, then I'm going to leave a link to download it in the description. On the morning of the 24th of June 2022, around 1,500 migrants carrying sticks and stones descended towards the Melilla border fence. It's worth noting that some of these people had taken part in the border crossing attempts in March, when Morocco were intentionally lenient. So, when the Moroccan authorities allowed them to make the 20-kilometre descent without intervention, a sense of normality ensued. I have to be careful filming around here because it's at this point I am now where the migrants arrived. To be honest, it's pretty surreal to be here knowing what happened that morning. As the migrants started to scale the border, the Moroccan security forces took up their positions and attacked. Truncheon blows, kicks and stone throwing ensued by hundreds of Moroccan agents that attacked indiscriminately. Some were beaten on the ground, whilst breathless and injured, and many,
including those that had been handcuffed and those that had fainted, were also targeted. After they were apprehended, they were taken to a confined space where they were piled on top of each other without concern for their injuries, broken limbs, or state of health. Authorities could have increased the space in which they were held, or placed them in adjacent spaces and organised for ambulances to tend to their assistance, but they chose not to. There was a distinct lack of emergency service interventions, including ambulances and medical attention, as evidence that the authorities' efforts were solely directed at repression with zero concern for human life. The Moroccan Association for Human Rights called it an apocalyptic scene. And after looking at the footage, you can see why. Some of the bodies were seen to be motionless when they were dumped to the ground, and also as officers were taking them back across the border fence. It's reported that assistance was not provided on site to the injured people, despite availability of further ambulances and medical staff. 9 buses to remove people were brought into use immediately, and at least 1 person died during the transfers that dumped people back in random rural areas of Morocco without any provision of nourishment or medical assistance. Officially, 37 migrants died that day, but according to Amnesty International, a further 76 remain unaccounted for in what became known as the Melilla Massacre.
So why did this happen? Well, given the positive treatment of migrants just 3 months earlier, as well as the lack of preemptive action that morning to ensure that there wasn't a mass arrival of migrants at the border, it's plausible to suggest that this was a deliberate move. A move to show the Spanish authorities that the Moroccan security would be willing to take hard action in controlling migration. And you could argue that the timing wasn't coincidental, with Spain recognising Morocco's plight for the Western Sahara just 3 months earlier. It's a pretty sobering thought to think that the lives of these migrants were essentially treated as an inconsequential part of a wider geopolitical game.
As I was leaving the area, I found myself with even more questions than I started with. How much responsibility does Spain have for the lives caught in the migration crisis? And what are they even meant to do? They're faced with a morally impossible task.
Border guards and the Guardia Civil are usually not the #1 people I have sympathy for. But I do have a little bit of understanding because basically they have to do the dirty work for the EU, right? The EU's we don't want these people, keep them out at any cost, right? And then well, how do you do it? And the way it's done is usually dirty business. I'm not justifying everything they do, right? But it's they have to do it. And then every now and then there's a report on German television saying, look, how bad they treat them. But in reality, they know the German politicians want this to happen and they expect it to happen. And so I feel it's a very unthankful job, right?
And what about Morocco? With its strategic position between Africa and Europe, and given its weaker diplomatic standing, does it have any choice but to leverage migration in its negotiations?
I mean, Western nations, when they don't like a government for whatever reason, they impose sanctions. They might just overthrow a regime just because of, economic and political short-term or long-term interests, right? Compared to that, within the world of real existing international relations, the way the world on foreign policy works, this Moroccan way of manipulating migrants, I think it's a very realistic way of asserting itself geopolitically vis-a-vis Europe in general and vis-a-vis Spain in specific.
We can and we shouldn't justify illegal immigration. But how do we balance the rule of law with the moral duty to protect those fleeing war, poverty, and violence? And at the bare minimum, avoid instances of needless brutality? These questions will get different answers depending on who you ask. But one thing is clear. The true victims are the migrants, desperate for a better life, who vanish and will continue to vanish into the shadows of Europe's deadliest land border.